Ahead of the anticipated health recovery from the coronavirus pandemic, Africa needs a quicker economic recovery as the continent's economy had gone down 2.1%, the worst ever it had in more than 25 years. This came from the head of the African Development Bank Group, Dr. Akinwumi Adeshina, as he discussed the financing that Africa needs to strategize its economy bounce back from COVID-19 just after the Africa-France summit that recently ended. Justin Bemunyi reports.
You know, to recover, this is not a pandemic. It's a pandemic that is actually quite massive, you know.
President of the African Development Bank, Dr. Akinwumi Adeshina, was speaking on Across Africa, an interview program on France 24 channel on financing Africa's post-COVID-19 recovery. Dr. Adeshina lamented how the African continent suffered massive drop in its GDP between $155 billion and $199 billion. And when the rest of the world had $23 trillion to respond to fiscal stimulus, Africa did not have that space. He re-emphasized that collective effort is needed at this time to look at the instruments the continent has to get that fiscal space that it needs, especially the issuance of the special drawing rights known as SDR at the IMF. The SDRs are basically the reserve quarters the IMF has to address global crises.
And why this is very important in the case of Africa is that, you know, last year, Africa needed gross additional financing of $154 billion, but it couldn't find it. I mean, the African Development Bank, we launched a $10 billion crisis response facility for Africa, which was massive. And then we launched a $3 billion social impact bond to fight COVID-19, which was the largest social impact bond, US dollar denominated ever in world history. World Bank, IMF, everybody else chipped in, but it wasn't enough. And so the real issue right now is how much does Africa need? Africa needs, sub-Saharan Africa alone, the low-income countries, they need roughly $245 billion of additional financing between now and 2025. But when you look at all of sub-Saharan Africa, they will need $425 billion between now and 2025.
The AfDB boss also highlighted the biggest hurdles the African continent faces in post-pandemic and how the huge amounts of money discussed at the France-Africa summit is going to change the lives of Africans.
You know, we talk quite a lot about growth and so on, and we talk about GDP. Look, nobody eats it. Nobody eats GDP. But at the end of the day, it's all about the quality of life of people. So one of the areas in which it's going to have to go to is to support Africa's recovery and building its access to vaccines. It's one of the critical issues, but also to support its manufacturing capacity in that. The second one is the standard things that we've always needed. So in fact, in terms of access to energy, you know, if you can't run good hospitals, you can't have good schools, you can't do agro-processing if you don't have access to energy. But we want that to be green energy. We want it to be renewable energy. So it's a green recovery process. The third one, of course, is we want it to be more climate resilient so that, you know, you are able to adapt to other challenges. You know, other challenges that they don't wait because you have COVID-19. They are always there. Make it also more resilient to climate. But of course, it must also be inclusive. Reduce inequalities we have. Most of the people that were affected by this challenge of COVID-19 were folks in the informal sector, a lot of young people, lots of women. And so we want to make sure that we can lend to them.
Dr. Adeshina says he wants the debt profile in Africa to reduce and be restructured, but the continent has to learn how to link good economic governance to debt management. This is because at the end of the day, African countries will have to mobilize a lot more resources domestically and have a better management of public financing, as well as efficiency of public expenditure and a greater transparency in debts. Justin Bemunyi, NTA News.